Welcome, sir. As panelists, we have Ms. Nappinai, who is the advocate at Supreme Court of India and founder at CyberSaathi. We have Ms. Sailaja Vadlamudi, who is the Senior Director of Security and Privacy at SAP and founder of Women in Cybersecurity and Privacy. And we also have Mr. Amit Sharma, who is the Advisor Cyber and Director at Ministry of Defense. Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am, all of you for joining in today and enlightening our youth. Mr. Sharad, over to you.
Thank you, Ita. First, my sincere compliments to you and your young brigade of what I can say now, social entrepreneurs with the kind of work you're doing. Welcome to this very, how should I say, distinguished panel. My very great pleasure, Mrs. Nappinai and Mr. Sharma. Welcome to the panel. I think we must all be similarly motivated to have a Sunday to spend on a dry subject like cybersecurity. But I'm sure there are participants that Ihita has in this meeting that would like to benefit from whatever wisdom, knowledge some of us can share. Before I just quickly get started, may I just check if my audio is clear and there's no problem with that? Okay, good. So I think it is worthwhile for any audience to get a little view of who they are listening to. I want to just check with the organizers. Would the audience have been given an introduction to the panelists before? Or is it something that you would expect now?
So if you could give an introduction, all the information regarding the panelists with their social media and the LinkedIn accounts and their bio has been updated on the website and shared.
Okay, and from an expectation point of view, would you recommend that we spend 2-3 minutes?
Sure, sir, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I'll do a quick start. I am a technology evangelist. I've been in telecoms for about 30 years, telco twice, and supplier community twice as well. Last assignment was with Tata Teleservices as the Chief Officer for Wireless Solutions. I had a leg in Tata Industries and another one, if you had 3, in Docomo. My job was to bring telecom enablement into Tata Industries, and my job was to launch 3G when it was launched by Tata Docomo. And also my job was to collaborate with Docomo's ever-growing set of services called the Life Enriching Services in 2010. When we were doing this, everything that we know with wallets today, everything that we know with security applications, etc., wasn't so clear. Last 6 years, I've been an entrepreneur in the IoT and M2M space. I've spent more than half my time authoring about a dozen odd IoT M2M security reports. I was the author of the DOT report on M2M security in 2019. In 2021, I have authored the ITU Y.3056 standard. It's possibly the first security standard contributed from India. It's a standard that says how we can use encryption, decryption, and roots of trust to give security to the billions of IoT devices belonging to maybe hundreds of different verticals, and how we can do that at a frugal cost. And how we can do that in a manner that countries and administrations within countries can still interoperably interface with each other, and how that interface can work through telcos across different types of devices and applications. That's a bit of me, maybe going in the order. Mrs. Nappinai, would you like a couple of minutes?
The short introduction I'd like to stick to is I'm an advocate practicing in the Supreme Court of India, and I'm founder of CyberSaathi. I'd request you all to look up www.cybersaathi.org for more details. Thank you all for having me here on this panel.
Thank you, Mrs. Nappinai. That's very interesting. I hope we will discover a little bit more of that in the panel today. Mrs. Vadlamudi, would you like to make a brief introduction of yourself for the audience?
Yeah, so also very warm welcome and good afternoon from my side. So happy to be with esteemed panelists today. And I'm working with SAP Labs as a Senior Director of Security and Privacy. And out of my passion to give back to the community, I have founded a nonprofit Women in Cybersecurity and Privacy, where we target on sensitizing girls and women and all generations, also targeting mainly in the rural areas. So far we have 10 chapters, and we have covered lot many government schools and many places in the rural India. And yeah, we believe there are a lot of there's a journey is quite long for us. And yeah, also looking forward to learn from this panel today.
Oh, that is truly remarkable. I am so impressed. Maybe another thing to discover and find out a bit more in the panel, and then maybe beyond that too. Mr. Sharma, would you like to say a few words for yourself?
Good afternoon. I'm Amit Sharma. I'm Advisor Cyber, Ministry of Defense. Basically, I'm an engineer and a graduate of Cranfield University in UK, and advanced specialization from APCS from US DoD. I have been engaged into cybersecurity activities for quite some time right now, and I'm also I was the member of the OEWG as well as the GG group of experts, UNGG group of experts from India, and I'm also taking up. There is a program called as National Malware Repository. It's a next generation malware analytics system, and we aspire to be among the largest, having the largest repository of malwares and a platform for the young entrepreneurs, the young generation, so as to look into how exactly this can be leveraged, specifically in the threat hunting domain, malware analysis domain, threat intelligence domain. That is there. And apart from it, I've been part of multiple national and international organizations. I was also involved into Talin 2.0 as one of the reviewers for the Talin manual in the NATO Center for Cyber Defense, and been working on certain aspects with regard to cybersecurity more from a national security perspective. Thank you.
Oh, that is truly remarkable, Mr. Sharma. So let's get started. Also, another compliment to Ita and the team that is coordinating this. It's an awesome bit of work putting together a panel of such diverse yet commonly unified interests in security. Okay, so I get started asking a few things so that, and when I say asking, I mean tabling a few things so that through those questions we can express what we believe to be the situation. Now, I think I fully understand that we all have a common awareness of the fact that cyber and security are meeting at a junction called IoT and 5G, and that this space of IoT and 5G is set to transform the lives and work in a manner that we possibly last saw around the 2008 or 2010, when we stepped from being fed with SMS and a very weak GPRS connection into the real broadband, into the real mobile broadband. And I think we've all seen how that completely transformed the way of working, living, and so on and so forth. The next big transformation that arrives now is a bit more widespread. It goes from just people getting connected to machines getting connected, and actually from machines getting connected to landscapes with all the virtual reality and augmented reality type augmentations that are here. So in this situation where our interactions with connected machines and the virtual world is going to exponentially rise, what is, in our view, the changed landscape from a security point of view, from a cyber threat point of view. I think let's pick up that subject. And again, it is such a vast subject. If I don't give it a little bit more definition, I don't think we will be able to converge properly. So let me start by discussing security by design. The concept of security by design finds credence in the fact that in this world that we are going to step into now, if you have not built in security, you cannot get security. So maybe I just take a pause here and go around the table and ask a very simple question. What does security by design mean to us as this panel? And I just say again, I'm absolutely delighted. There is a very senior advocate on the panel. There is a very senior government representative and a very, very senior industry representative. So couldn't have been a simpler question and a more appropriate question to start regaling the audience with. What does security by design mean to us? Maybe starting with Mrs. Nappinai and going in the same order as introductions.
Well, since your question pertained to security, I was waiting for the security experts to come in first.
Okay,
So
let's get with SAP first. Thank you very much, ma'am. Okay. Let's get with SAP first.
Yes. So security by design, right? I think with this pandemic, it is very evident our primary space is the digital space, and moreover, it's the cyberspace. And starting from a common citizen to a corporate, security is the key, because I think when we construct the house, right, because since we have a bunch of students over here, we don't think of whether to have a lock for the house or whether to have windows, whether to have everything, whether to have a safe where I'm going to place things which are really valuables and all of that. But in the current era, what is happening is when it comes to this cyberspace or the digital world, we are not quite sure how things work when it comes to like a house, how we are having a keys and special cupboards and so on and so forth. When we are trying to save our valuables or most important documents, the content related to us. So security by design, like how we are, constructing the house, having the key. For example, in the olden days, we had this physical key, but nowadays with the smart is the new style in the market. Maybe people have digital keys, right? Or keyless entry, you have some token and then you just enter the house. In the similar way, whenever we are in this cyberspace, right, it is really important, like we take necessary measures. Like, for example, everybody knows there's a password for if you're logging into a Gmail or a Twitter or Instagram, whatever it is. But security by design is like all these platforms, be it social media, be it e-commerce, everybody is offering default security features by design. And as a normal citizen or as a corporate, it's important for us to understand what is it in there. Like, for example, multi-factor authentication is very much available on all the platforms, security by design. And at the same time, since Sharadji was also talking about IoT, 5G and all of that, right? Sometimes the most important factor or unfortunate situation is technology is advancing at a very fast pace, and then security is not able to follow it with the phase where technology is advancing. That's wherein we see a lot of these attacks, a lot of these hacks, and a lot of these compromises, data breaches here and there we see in the space. But now in this era where we are living in the junction, where this entire space is going to be only digital, it's really important for us to ensure, first of all, to understand what all security features are important and to build and bake security into the key fundamentals of everything and anything we see around and across is the need of that, is what I have to say.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that is excellent. You picked up for security by design the concept of keyless entry, which is good because that is very easy for people to follow. And then you picked up the concept of authentication, which is equally important. Keyless entry gives you a sense of identity, gives you a sense of having a key, of course, to a lock. And then authentication says further that in order to know who it is that you are about to give the key to, you need to have some identities, and then you need to have digital means to verify those identities inside what can be called transactions and sessions, etc. Thank you very much. Sailaja, is that okay, Sailaja? I'm okay to be called Sharad, please.
Yes.
I don't want to look very old and aged with any further salutations attached to that. So please call me Sharad. Amit, is that okay to be Amit?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, Amit, would you say what is your understanding for the audience of security by design?
When you say security by design, typically if you look into the classical information security, security by design has been one of the very important tenets. But actually this whole term of security by design was in a much larger context, was introduced way back. And if my memory is correct, it was Microsoft that did it quite eloquently. They created what was called as the SD3 model: the security by design, the security by default, and security by deployment. And that is what changed the scenario. When you are talking about the information security constructs of CIA, the confidentiality, of course, maintained by the encryption, the keys were mentioned. So cryptography is something that's been looked into that space. Integrity, again, hashing algorithms, cryptographic algorithms, integrity is maintained. Then you are looking into authentication and, in certain cases, availability, because that is one of the prime paradigms. The key aspect for these principles to actually work in any of a security system, in any of a system per se, is based on the three fundamental guiding lines. And these three fundamental guiding lines have been security by design, security by deployment. And when we say by design, that means that security is ab initio part of the product development itself, rather than being in silos or an overlay that is integrated as part of an extra set into the overall product. Then deployment of that particular, then particular default aspects of it. For example, if you're looking into, it's not the fact that the security, and that is where this particular concept touches the concepts of privacy, because many a times when we talk about defaults, that is where the thin red line unknowingly gets crossed by the layman users, because typically by default there were instances where the service providers were having lesser amount of security, thinking that the users would be quite intelligent enough to look into the aspects. And that is where the default aspects are very important. The last and the foremost is security by deployment. Now, the security by deployment is a key asset, because that is where the information security aspects, even if you have the best of the security by design, even if you have the best of the security by default, but if the deployment is not right, that is what leaves another important hole into this whole paradigm. Having said so, the fundamental principles of CIA and the guiding principles of SD3, do you really think that SD3 is more relevant in the current day scenario? I have a quite opposite thought process to it. Let's come to security by design, or security by default, or security by deployment. I'll start with the security by design. Now, pandemic, when it came, typically when we were designing systems, we were always designing systems looking into what is our threat surface area. We were always looking into the aspects that what we have to protect, what is our territory, what is, that resulted into something called as a perimetric security systems and so on. But pandemic changed the scenario altogether. You had work from home, you had scenarios where, the home systems, which were never used to be connected into a corporate network, they are getting connected into corporate networks. So what is happening? The attack scenario or the attack surface is changing drastically. So things which were designed, even secure by design, were not meant for that kind of a scenario. That is where an infringement is happening. Now let's come to the scenario of security by default. Of course, security by default, the scenario, you have the primary things aspect, you have by default certain conditions, certain properties that are ensured in the default aspects. For example, the password has to be this much long. But when you are looking into scenarios of state actors and non-state actors, and typically when you are looking into cyber criminal aspects, when you are looking into, phishing, when you are looking into spear phishing, and I'm not even talking about APT groups, because that's a different ball game altogether. Now, the things, even if you have security by design, that I am not gonna, this is the kind of transaction that will be allowed, this is the transaction which not would be allowed. Those default parameters can always be changed, because essentially the people your adversaries, they are quite cognizant to this fact that these SD3 principles do work. And when we are looking into security by deployment, no, security by deployment has altogether changed, because as I said, the attack surface has changed, the scenario has changed, and the overall way in which the targeting happens, and very specialized targeting happens both in the cyber criminal space as well as cyber warfare space, and that has resulted into demeaning of these aspects. And to further complicate the matters, we have the rise of new set of technologies that defines that altogether change the paradigm in which we work. For example, when we talk about technologies such as quantum computing. Now, basic security, when we talk, Shalja was speaking about keys. It was based on cryptographic algorithms. These cryptographic algorithms are based on fundamental, NP complete, NP hard problems of mathematics. But immediately when you have, and typically for a scenario of a sequential kind of execution, when you have complexity that is always driven by 2 to the power n and so on. But when you are looking into a quantum technology, all those 2 to the power n states they exist in the real time when you are looking into the quantum bits. So essentially the whole paradigm gets changed. When you are looking into AI, that is altogether changing what we call as security by default, because essentially AI is mimicking the human behavior itself. And when you are looking into the evolved workspace in terms of hybrid workspace and so on, you are looking into targeting of the security by deployment. So we need to probably rethink what the scenario and what the design principles need to be there in the evolving contemporary threats landscape. Thanks.
Thank you, Amit. I just want to very quickly, maybe in a couple of minutes, if I can try to point out to the audience. And maybe
actually, Sharad, I have not yet come in on the response. I think you may have forgotten.
Not at all. I just felt that for the 9 minutes that Amit spoke, I could summarize for the audience what he said, and then come back to you, because I am mindful that we have to keep or take the audience along too. So if you just bear with me for 2 minutes, basically Amit has introduced the SD3 of, let's say, what came from IBM's table. He introduced a very important triad. It's called the security triad. He introduced CIA, confidentiality, integrity, and authentication. And then he introduced a very important subject called the perimeter of security. Historically, when we set up telecom networks, we used to look for dark centers. We used to look for places that were completely inconspicuous. A person wouldn't even know. When I set up my security center, you will not believe it was set up on the side of a halwai in a place in Mathura Road, so that people would know or wouldn't suspect that there's a data center sitting somewhere here. So all sorts of things that would ensure that the perimeter was secure. But now with work from home and things like that, what Amit introduced is that the whole corporate security takes on a new challenge. And he said, takes on a new challenge in the domain of security by deployment, because now the challenge for the chief security officers is much larger. The threat vectors and the threat surfaces expand, because earlier you were trying to protect the corporate lands. Now what are you trying to protect? People are coming in from all sorts of Wi-Fi networks, etc. So bigger challenge. He brought that in. He also brought in a concept of quantum. I don't think I'm going to touch that right now. We'll probably try and see, we pick it up as a separate point in this discussion. And similarly, the whole issue with AI and with that kind of intelligence and with that kind of power that sits on the edge. Whilst on the network side, that same AI can help protect assets On the aggressor side, that same AI gives huge amount of power to quickly break through algorithms and to quickly break through passwords, etc. Thank you, Amit, for that very interesting perspective of what the simple question was, security by design. I'm back to you, ma'am.
Thank you. And please do take the liberty of calling me Nappinai too, unless you find it difficult to
Not
pronounce my name.
Not at all. I was
I
just
forgot
hoping
to
that I'd get
mention
that.
earlier. I forgot to mention earlier that 2 out of the 3 co-panelists, meaning including you as moderator in that list, are known to me, and I therefore anticipate the kind of inputs they would bring in, the quality of it rather. And it also makes my life so much easier when I can come in after that to just fill in the gaps, right? Because, you know, the minute we talk about law, everybody thinks it's something dry. And I don't agree with the opening statement you made, Sharad. Cybersecurity is dry. It is not. It's fascinating, right? So I am not here to bore you all or make it scary in terms of law, etc. on a Sunday afternoon. I'm just here to share some stories. So Sharad, you'll have to bear with me on that.
Please bring on the stories.
Very quick. Yeah. So for the participants, let's see how alert you are. Start posting on the chat box as I ask you these questions. If I say a Nike shoe, what comes to your mind? Quickly, I'll keep asking a lot of these questions, so start posting on the chat box. If I say a tea kettle, do you think it has any relevance to the topic we are discussing here? If I say baby monitors, what in heaven's name is Nappinai speaking about, right? Do you believe that? Do you think any of the things I just mentioned to you are relevant to the topics that we are discussing here? Let's take, cybersecurity. Security is a part of the title. If I say security cameras, you think I'm coming a little closer to the topic than what I was earlier? Tea kettles, Sunday afternoon, maybe I'm just dreaming up of my tea and snacks already or whatever, right? So do you think that all of these various things, in fact, I was very vigorously trying to search for one of my favorite slides to do a slide share right now with you. Unfortunately, I couldn't find that presentation. But I was actually going to start my opening statement with the picture of James Bond. My favorite James Bond, It's still, it's a reflection of my age probably, but I still prefer Sean Connery to all the other James Bonds who came after that. So very quickly, let me come in on what am I speaking about. Some of the largest IoT attacks or Internet of Things attacks that have happened across the world, be it in terms of bringing down what is called the DIN server attack, or of the entire Internet of Liberia, was done using an army. And again, another favorite slide of mine, I just use a picture of minions for that. And there's an army of minions. And that's what they did. They used an army of minions to bring down these huge server networks. And what was the army of minions you used? Tea kettles, baby monitors, security cameras, and these are all IoT devices. So the relevance to the question that Sharad asked here and to my stories to you are as follows. When we speak about IoT, it's so fascinating. If time permits, I will share one very funny story with you all. Sharad spoke about, and Sailaja also touched upon, about the key to a house, and about how you no longer have keys, physical keys to the house, but you just enter using codes, etc. Right? So here in 2007 or 9 is a person who's actually very smart. He decides to convert his entire home to a smart home, but the only thing he doesn't change to smart is the entrance to his house. Thank heavens for that. Because one day he finds out that his home has been attacked. It's an IoT attack. And who attacked his home? A light bulb. Don't think you heard me wrong. You heard me right. A light bulb attacked his smart home. What had happened? Very simple, right? The light bulb fused. something that happens in every single home of ours. If a light bulb fuses, depending on the relevance of the point of that light, we will decide whether to change it the same day or maybe a few weeks or months later, right? Whenever it comes to our mind. But here, when it is IoT enabled, because here it's a smart home, so all the devices from the refrigerator to the television to the light bulb were all IoT enabled. And therefore, when it fused, the light bulb emitted messages to the hub saying, asking it to change it, right? So in simple terms, if I were to use the word saying, change me, change me, change me messages, so that the entire message of asking for it to be changed because it has fused, it needed to be repaired immediately. It turned out to actually function like a denial of service attack because the overflow of messages to the hub brought the hub down. And then it crashed the entire smart home and everything collapsed. Thankfully, this person who had made his home smart could still enter the house because he had not made the key smart and it had not locked itself up. So he was able to enter, change the light bulb and bring his systems back in order. Reason I'm pointing out these simple stories to a very complex issue that Sharad has started off with is to explain when we speak about security by design. IoT devices are literally at the lowest end of the spectrum in terms of the quality of security it brings to the table. You have simple factory-enabled passwords which are not even changed by the owners of meaning the purchasers of the IoT devices. Most may not even realize there is a factory-enabled password, which they needed to change. So it becomes therefore the most vulnerable also. So when we are talking about technology, one of my favorite quotes, which I have put in my book, I actually drew from Thoreau, and in Thoreau's time, they didn't have technology like this. So you may wonder what exactly I drew from him, but I can tell you the quote is so fascinating and so evocative, mentally. It talks about how we are propelling ourselves, and my adaptation of the quote is of course relevant to technology. That technology is propelling us with no plans, no brakes, and no idea of where we are headed. So you're just moving over to a precipice. So imagine you're hang gliding. I know I love adventure sports. So let's take that as an example. And you're just going to fly off the cliff. So you would have checked the harness, the equipment, your safety mechanism, which will be a parachute if if something else fails, etc., right? Some 10 times before you will jump off the cliff. When you buy technology, when you adapt to technology, when you start using technology or even developing technology, the last thing on your mind is security. You don't think that is something you need to pause and spend time on or spend energy or money on. Whenever we talk about trade-offs in terms of security versus speed in terms of developing and releasing a product, speed in terms of its adaptation, being the first player in the market, or from a user perspective, being the first to start adapting, being the first to use. A new toy in the market is fascinating for all of us, right? So how much do we then pause to really think about security? And Sharad's question, therefore, when we speak about cybersecurity in terms of security by design, therefore becomes most important, be it from the perspective of the developer who cannot give that hang glider to a person to jump off a cliff without first checking whether it will keep that person secure, to the user themselves, who themselves should make sure that whatever security measures they believe are needed are in place. And that process is a simple explanation I wanted to put forth, Sharad, in terms of security by design. And what is the role of law in all of this? Now, you can either ask people to be secure, self-regulation, or you can start laying down the ground rules in terms of what is it that you insist should be done to ensure that security. So Amit, in fact, in his opening comment also pointed out one aspect in terms of standards. And I think Sailaja mentioned about the two-factor authentication. So these are all legal or regulatory frameworks which bring in the security by design. And this is where law plays a role in terms of either allowing an industry to evolve organically, or, and I call it the tipping point, okay? And I say that, you know, anything and everything, particularly innovation, will grow up to a point, and after that point, for it to grow further or to fall back, actually that point is where law is supposed to step in to enable innovation. And that enabling process is a role that law plays already in some instances and is likely to play a lot more in terms of mandating, making it mandatory for security by design to be implemented at a development stage, at an implementation stage, and as the usage stage, rather than just leaving it for the stakeholders to take a call themselves. Over to you, Sharad.
Thank you, Nappinai. It's a very, very interesting discourse on how the baby monitors and how the minions, as you called it, the army of minions comes into play in what can be called a hack or a breakdown of security infrastructures. And thanks as well to bring in the legislation aspect, but that also gives me a chance to go to that other subject, which is, as we will grapple with making the ecosystem, including the user ecosystem, more aware of the risks and more aware of the new norms that we will need to follow in this new cybersecurity space. I think the importance of standards, the importance of cross-border standards, the importance of cross-border legislation for information and data management, subjects that have hitherto not, they've all been important always, but they were not center stage. They weren't affecting, like today, they affect the infamous story of social networks virtually changing the outcomes of national elections, the matters of privacy that Amit brought out, what will become very important legislation surrounding data management, not just for, let's just say, what happens to a user, but also what happens to a corporate and what happens actually to a country with the data that it manages. So this whole concept exposes itself to an enormous amount of standardization, policy making, legislation, and hence connects up to the law and those other legal procedures, both inside the country and cross-border, that will become important. So I'm trying to think now, debate in my mind whether we should take a shot at giving some more time to tech like quantum and AI, or maybe it's 20 minutes to 3. Let's spend a little while on standards, global standards. Let's spend a little while on legislation. That way I remain in the good books of Nappinai, and then maybe we can try to circle around. But let's just spend maybe 2-3 minutes each. And let me start with Amit. Amit, just some few thoughts for the audience on standards, policy, legislation as it applies to cybersecurity today.
Thank you, Sharad. When we talk about this particular space, and probably you are touching the governance space of the digital world, as I say it. Typically, I'm not very happy with when I use the word cyberspace, but I always like the word digital space because the ambit of it is much larger. And of course, Madam Nappinai, I can say it, we don't allow the bulbs to do like that, because then it's a security controller for the smart home itself is not compliance. The compliance is not there, and ideally it should not have been deployed. So compliance is one of the key aspects, else world would have been a wild west. Why I wanted to start with that bulb? Because in that particular world, the compliance is not there. The bare minimums are not there. When the bare minimums are not there, the world turns into a Wild West. It's not the fact that it hasn't happened in the physical world. In the physical world also, if you see, there was a time, and I'm talking about long time, in the early times of the civilization, when whosoever is the strongest, he used to rule the roost. So, your strength defined what kind of assets you would be having and so on. But typically for a society to work, for a society to evolve, you require certain kind of stabilizations, because then it is, animal biting animal, and you are going to end up into a primordial kind of a society that typically doesn't work for a society to evolve further. So in this particular scenario, when you are looking into this, that is where there is a set of governance components that comes into the play, and that is how we saw panchayats, gram panchayats, we saw the feudal system, then subsequently the kingships, and then democratic systems and so on. And of course, in certain places we have one party rule also, and communist party and so on. There are a lot of multiple scenarios in which things go around all the world. But the key aspect is why this has been done. It's to maintain order. It's to maintain the survivability of the society, so that the society gets time and assets so as to evolve to its next level, which can always happen when the society is guaranteed an important aspect, its security. Security is not just about some guy having a stick and standing outside. No, that's a very primordial model of security. Security is also about food security. Security is also about mental security. Security provides peace, and the peace is essentially very much important for a person to evolve, for a society to evolve. Now, what defines the basis on which this security is to be created? That is where this whole gamut of governance comes into the play, starting from a very primordial set, very preliminary set of what we called as the standards, typically lying at the lower end of the bracket, typically defining that what are the kind of standards that needs to be complied. And we have a whole lot of these standards that are coming, that are targeting every space of working, right from IEEE standards. You had 27001 and so on, 27002. Then you have SDLCs and so on. The standards for everything. You have mil grade standards, even for fighting a war. An equipment that you might be using in a normal scenario, it doesn't work typically in a military environment. You have military standards. So you have in the lowest of this, pyramid, this is the standards, because standards define that what is the bare minimum that needs to be there. Now, that was the first part. Then subsequently, again, the society is asked, okay, these are the standards. Now, let's see how the society reacts. So there are two models. The first, what Nappinai referred very nicely, that the first is self-regulation. You see the standards and you do a self-compliance, a self-regulation for it. Yes, I will conform. I will conform into it. But unfortunately, many times there is always a bad egg. There are always few bad eggs. There are always, laxity, sometimes intentionally, sometimes unintentionally. When it comes to intentionally, then it goes into the criminal space and so on. The law comes into the place. When it comes inadvertently or, inadvertently or laxity, then it is non-compliance that comes into the place. Now, when the self-regulation doesn't work, then it evolves to the next tier of the pyramid. That is where the very same standards which were meant first for self-compliance moves into an organizational or institutional compliance. And that is where the regulations comes into the play. That is where the state runs into the play. Now, many times I hear this discourse, even in OEWG and all that, people always tend to say that regulation, it is always states trying to infringe into something, or government infringing into something. No, it's never has been the case. If you see the IT sector, the way in which 5G has come into the country, and it has 4G has come into the country, and it revolutionized everything. You never had these many interconnections and everything. Even now, a rickshawala has a mobile phone through which you can contact him, and that has revolutionized the change of the things. But again, as these things, these technologies came, along with the stack came the standards. Then the choice was left to the society whether you have to look into a self-regulation. But when the self-regulation scenarios didn't work, when you had attacks, let's take the case in US, for example, Titan Rain and so on, let's take the case of all around the world, then there was a need or a calling from the society itself that okay, things are not going in self-regulation mode. That is when the regulation part comes into the play. But who is making these regulations? It is the government. And what is government? Government is for the people, by the people, and of the people. So it is essentially people only who are making the regulation, and that is what unfortunately in most of the discussions we tend to forget. The start of everything comes with technology in one space, and the regulation also is the standards in the other space, but it migrates at a higher level and evolves into these particular legal regulations. Now, when we come into these legal regulations at the top of the pyramid, these legal regulations again are subdivided by the so-called artificial boundaries or the Westphalian model of jurisdiction. So you have these legal domains in what is called as the domestic laws. For example, in Indian case, you have the IT laws, the IT Act, and subsequently its amendment. Although it's my personal belief that it's quite some time that and IT law definitely needs another amendment, specifically in the contemporary changing scenario. And then when you are looking into the global scenario, you have instruments such as the international law, specifically into the cyberspace. When you go into international treaties, Budapest Convention in cybercrime, there is a new treaty in UN that is being rolled out specifically for cybercrime. That's another thing that is going into the cybercrime space. And that is the hard laws part of it. The soft laws part of it is in the form of norms, the confidence building measures, CBMs, and so on. That is at the international level, what you typically would see in the UNGG report, governmental group of experts.
I have to come in a little bit. I have promised to Ihta that we will have 10 minutes for audience questions. And now we are 11 minutes away from those 10 minutes. So if you don't mind, I'm just going to quickly interrupt and bring this to Sailaja. Sailaja, would you express some views on the, I think I will modify my statement. Amit brought in the governance of not the cyber, but the digital.
Cyber is never dry.
I'm so sorry.
The key aspect, cyber is never dry. Cybersecurity is never dry. The thing is, it depends upon how you take that subject. Cyber touches almost everything that we deal upon it.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, we always scratch the top of the pyramid. And that is why the dryness comes. If we go the full stack, then we'll see how much juicy it is.
It is.
Thank you.
I thank you very much, Amit. I really did. How should I say, wag the red flag to the bulls here, and I'm glad I did it. It brought in a lot of. Okay, coming back to Sailaja. Sailaja, would you like to express a few minutes governance of the digital space and standards, policy making, legislation? What's your view?
Yeah, so since Amit bought, a lot variety of combination of it, let me just try to bring it from the organizational perspective, right? Or for example, if all of us, can also relate to what is happening with this big buzz of, in the market about this Bitcoins or whatever. Because every time, whenever I was invited on the panel, mostly on the data privacy thing, right? Because data privacy, we have European Union, GDPR is the first one to come up with a policy when it comes to privacy. And there are a lot of debates in and around about data localization, because be it Europe, be it India, be it any country coming up with this kind of regulatory aspects, right? Everybody is acting like some sort of personal data, some sort of financial data has to be residing within the country, and you're not supposed to send the data leaving the borders and so on and so forth. And yes, for sure, as a technology person, I also say it limits the innovation and many other aspects to that. But looking into the things that are happening around, right, when we talk about this legislation and all of that, now we see a lot of, every day it is hitting the headlines, like people are losing many crores in the Bitcoins. And the reason being, the hackers are trying to have their servers outside India. And then, yes, we have this Budapest Convention and all of that, but it's not so easy to get the data immediately back and try to intervene from the legal authorities perspective and so on and so forth. And also the fact, because I was also on this Bureau of Indian Standards panel where we are drafting the IoT, security and privacy aspects. When we talk about this legislation or rules or laws or regulations or whatever we term it or name it, right? It has to be spread across the entire pyramid, as Amit was also talking about. We have different layers, starting from how the manufacturer is going to manufacture this small, tiny device when it comes to IoT, right? And where the keys are going to be and who is going to take the ownership, and what about the security standards? Because some of the sectors have banned some of the chips manufactured by some specific countries and so on and so forth. So yes, I see there's a lot more work here happening, and at the same time, there's a lot more work has to be done in collaboration with all the countries. For example, when we say data localization is one other aspect, but on the other side, for example, if anybody is going to put some platform like Bitcoins or people investing into any other market, right? We also have to strictly ensure like people who are trying to play in this, borders of India or whatever country, the prominence has to be given, the data has to reside within the country itself, because there are a lot many crimes that are happening in and around and all of that. And again, when I come to cloud, right, the pain point is again storing my data and across borders and following all these regulations. Yes, people are the ones who have defined the regulations. People are the ones who are driving the regulations. People are the ones who are also violating the regulations, is what I have to say. Because it's not easy in the nutshell to have so many things in mind, when I am in the cloud, kind of a setup where I have to follow so many regulations in the end, ensure the CIA, confidentiality, integrity, and availability of the data, and so on and so forth. So yes, and on the other side, if I have to just bring the customer perspective, right? Nowadays, customers upfront, they ask us, can you show us the audit reports? What are you complaint about? What are your regulations about? Only then they are going to sign a deal whether they would like to go with your product or not. So this space is also getting a lot of prominence, because everybody is quite aware this digital space is not so safe, and it's really slippery in most of the places. And yes, the awareness is there, but at the same time, there is a lot more work that is needed in collaboration with different countries and different platforms, speaking from IoT to 5G or healthcare or whatever it is. And yes, and so I say, like, and again, in the end, it is also bringing a lot many challenges to the technical organizations who are working in the technology space to be able to adhere, not compromising the CIA space of that. Sharad, you're on mute in case if you're speaking. Yeah.
Thank you, Sailaja. Thank you for a very insightful and informative and simply put. So I'm not going to paraphrase it again. I think if you allow me, I'll come to Nappinai for 2-3 minutes, if you don't mind, because Ihita has been kind enough to message me that they gave us 5 extra minutes because they are very keen to allow questions from the audience. But then that will be, we should try to wrap up at 3:05. So Nappinai, please, your view.
I'll try to make it 1 minute, in fact, Sharad, if possible. See, the two things which I wanted to point out. One is that Amit has already pointed out very nicely all the legal as well as the soft law aspects, which is the international laws and treaties, etc. But you know what? I'm going to pick up from where Sailaja stopped, because she used a magic word there. Bitcoins, cryptocurrency. And I will pose my statement based on that, right? Today, we are at this juncture where the finance minister has already made a statement about the possibility of regulation coming into place with respect to cryptocurrencies. We have a nice young millennial crowd in this audience. What would your reaction have been when that statement came? Trepidation, expectation, anger that, why should it come now? Let us be kind of a reaction. Or did you really think, was there even a minority amongst you who believed that with this statement, And with a possible regulation or bill, you're actually getting certainty and security. You will get to know where you stand. You will get to know what is permissible and what is not. That is what law actually brings to the table. If you are an innovator, remember, you're innovating not just for the pleasure of innovation. There are many who do it, right? We all work out of passion. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here on a Sunday afternoon. But there is also an element of payback. There is also an element of return on investment. That comes with law. That comes, if law weren't there to give you that protection, intellectual property rights are not there to protect your rights as an innovator, then where is your return on investment going to come? Similar is the case with cybersecurity and the need for law, and why, therefore, any kind of a regulatory framework that is brought in is not really an impediment, but it is actually a certificate of affirmation in terms of what is permissible and impermissible. And once that certainty comes into the picture, that is when your investor will be assured that they can come in and invest on a product, because tomorrow the law is not going to play a truant like it is going to in cryptocurrency laws and overturn the bandwagon for you. So with this, let me just give a little bit of a background before I close out. We all speak about the Information Technology Act as synonymous with cyber laws. Firstly, our cybersecurity. Firstly, it may be a shock to some of you or all of you. The IT Act was never intended for cybersecurity. It was not even intended for cyber crimes. And believe me, cyber crimes and cybersecurity may be interchangeable in some instances, but not in all. I'm not going into too much of a detail there, but just pausing with that. The IT Act was enacted only to enable e-commerce in 2000. There was an international framework needed. You know, we are signatories to WTO and to various other international treaties, and therefore we needed to bring in laws to ensure that the model laws, which were already brought in by the UN, will become part of municipal laws. So the focus was e-commerce. Today, you have a few additional provisions after 2008 amendments, which bring in a substantial number of provisions pertaining to cyber crimes and some provisions pertaining to cybersecurity. We are poised at a juncture where we are likely to get new laws, probably for both cyber crimes as well as cybersecurity, but anything to do with law is glacial. If we start talking about it today, you're looking at a few years down the line, right? You're not talking about a few days or months. But what we really need in terms of innovation is certainty and clarity and transparency. And I always believe, and I may be called an optimist or just a person with utopian ideals or whatever, but believe me, it actually works. And that's the role I wanted to emphasize in terms of what law does. And on the note of cryptocurrencies, it is something that you're going to have to face in terms of reality, that the law is likely to be stringent. So that's just on an aside and as a word of caution. Again, using the same as an analogy to explain why you can't just do away with cybersecurity even as an innovator or as a user. We need it, and we have to ensure that it is brought into our lives by design and by default, because you can't just assume that this is something you will worry about as and when needed. You know, you'll worry about it. You will ask for forgiven, to be forgiven instead of for permission. Doesn't really work, and it's not likely to going forward also. Over to you, Sharad.
Thank you, Nappinai. That was, again, very, very insightful. I know time is short and we can't pick up the many gems of wisdom that you have just delivered, but to those who were listening, I'm sure they would have taken away their few pieces of learning from here. I'm going to come back to the organizers because I think I have to ask them how they would like it done. It's 1 minute past 3. Are there questions to the panelists, organizers that you want to read out?
Yes, sir. So there is a question from Vivian. Vivian, maybe you could quickly ask two questions. And also to the speaker.
That voice was very clipped, but I understood that the organizer was asking one person to verbalize the question. So please, who was that person, please?
Good afternoon. So we have already discussed about cybersecurity and obviously thrown some light on cryptocurrency. So I like to, with the help of Amit, I like to throw some light on the national security side of it. Like on the recent economic panel, Hillary Clinton declared that cryptocurrencies have a destabilizing potential. So in an environment when China is coming up with its own digital currency and US sort of shying away from it, how best do you see India sailing through this tide?
Okay, I understand that Deven's question is to you, Amit. You have the first port of call.
Probably that is one space I wanted least to be answering that, but
Hazards of being on a panel.
Of course, and these are my personal views and need not to be corroborated or correlated with my official, perspective, because I've been part of that also. Now, when you are talking about cryptocurrency, you need to understand that what exactly cryptocurrency is. Of course, you see it by a very, a very small myopic window, bitcoins and so on. That's all. That's all. But cryptocurrency, of course, the criminal aspects of it, it has certain very different connotations with regard to whether attributability is there or not, and then subsequently how exactly that is utilized. But that is the kind of scenario with the fiat currency, or your normal currency, what we call as the paper currency. But another national security aspect, you need to understand that what is cryptocurrency? Cryptocurrency is almost like running a parallel economy. You need to understand that when you are running a cryptocurrency, you are running almost like a parallel economy. One aspect to it is you ensure that parallel economy also becomes part of your main economy, and that is what the Chinese are doing. And essentially, when they say, it's not the fact that Chinese are allowing BTC. If you see most of their official communication, they will be banning everything. But the only thing that they are doing, they are coming up with their own national cryptocurrency that would be, for larger domain, because the whole intent is essentially to bring down this other part of the economy, which is unregularized and not part of the main economy, as part of the main economy itself. You need to understand the larger perspectives for it, because when you are maintaining, the cryptocurrency essentially works on a concepts of decentralized, distributed ledger concept, and the whole idea is that the centralization needs to be removed off. The moment the centralization is removed off, essentially it becomes part of a shadow economy that is there. So what the Chinese are primarily doing, they are essentially bringing back this decentralized part of it into their national economy. So essentially, what this parallelization is removed, and they will be increasing their economy further ahead, specifically by tapping into this poised new found economy that is already existing and running parallelly over it. Having said so, and this is one important aspect for it, cryptocurrencies has a lot of national security implications. Criminal aspect is one part of it, which all of you are availing of. There have been numerous cases where cryptocurrency has been utilized in terrorist related activities, terrorist funding related activities, money laundering activities, which are typically in a very sinister aspect of cyberspace, which typically most of us do not see and value into. The other important aspect is the crypto economy has always a particular, of course, it's far-fetching the argument to quite a long. It has always the potential of destabilizing the national currencies in a way. not to a country like India, which is typically, because it is the scale that matters, but typically smaller nations that is there. So it has national security perspective. But here the key question lies is that what path we will be choosing. And that is a very important and very interesting path, that whether we essentially bring back the crypto, this unregulated economy, as part of the main economy, so that it help. At the end of it, why economy is required? Economy is required for providing, reaping the benefits of that economy and giving it to the general public for the benefit of the larger society. So would the answer that probably you need to ask yourself is, would you be happy to reap the benefits of this unregulated economy into the national economy, and essentially the benefits of that can be reaped and can be given for larger social benefit and the upliftment of the country? That is one part. Or you want to have a parallel economy that has no social obligations and so on. It is fulfilling the needs of few who had that, and of course in the side part it is also going into the nefarious activities and so on. So that is a question you have to answer. I'm giving you both the perspectives. The choice is yours. You weigh it. What do you want? Support for everyone or support for just a few? And of course, the nefarious part of it. That's the secondary connotation to it. I hope I answered you in the best possible way without going beyond my official aspects.
I think that was very nice, Amit. And maybe there could be more questions into the organizers, and I'm sure maybe they can find a way to get those questions to the panelists and maybe get the answers back to the audience. But I see that there is a suggestion from the organizers to have one more question from Divya, and then we will have to close this panel. So please, organizers, will you verbalize the question from Divya, and who does she want the answer from?
So Divya has a question for Nappinai ma'am. Ma'am, she's asking, could you elaborate on the implications of data surveillance via electronic and emotional toys or social media and its applications on rights of children?
Very, very important part of it, especially considering our discussion with respect to IoT. Please look up online this the directive that the European Union had to give against this doll called Kayla. See, sometimes we don't know what we are bringing into our lives. The same way as I told you about the Thoreau's quote, right? We just rush in because there is something new, and here it's literally a new toy and not just a new toy in the form of technology. And when we speak about rights and data against data surveillance and misuse or abuse through usage of toys or other play articles. Now, this becomes a classic case because Kayla was this cute little doll which turned out to be an Annabelle kind of thing. Because here was a doll which had a chat bot and was interacting with children. And it was not interacting with just responding to questions, but actually having conversations to collect information about likes, dislikes, wants, etc. of children. So you have, by bringing in a toy into your home, introduce your child to not one, but many strangers. You're allowing your child to speak to strangers, which you would never do otherwise. Once, and I'm not saying if, but I'm saying once the data protection law, and it is no longer the personal data protection law, it's more in the form of a combination of personal and non-personal data. Once data protection law becomes a reality in India, there is a specific provision which militates against profiling of children, particularly by what they call guardian data fiduciaries. I would strongly urge legislators to relook the provision to not just limited to guardian data fiduciaries, because if somebody were doing it in smaller numbers, it doesn't make it okay when it pertains to children. So we don't just have a doll kind of situation. You have many, many ways, including one case that came out of a nursery cam becoming, being hacked, and images of an 8-year-old being uploaded online. So any form of technology that you bring into your home, and I usually use the example of a vampire being invited into the house, unless and until you invite a vampire and it can't come. I mean, that's according to all these teenage fiction. But, once you invite it into the house, then You can't ask for it to leave. So technology is like that. So be really careful in terms of what you invite into the house. And that's what the European Union says. And its directive is specific to toys and playthings, etc. But then let me just close out with this warning. Just look at the kind of technology risk an electronic dog, for instance, would have. Aibo, take Aibo, for instance. It comes not with one, but with 2 cameras, because one on its nose and one on its back. One to facilitate the dog to move around without bumping into various articles in a home. And the other is to identify who it is interacting with. So it works differently when it is the owner or a visitor, etc. But imagine the kind of data that Aibo is then collecting, including of children who are in the house. And Aibo is not looked at as a play toy or as a doll. It is looked at as technology in the house, as a facilitator, as something which as a pet, e-pet, so to say, right? So we need to evaluate what exactly, and as Amit rightly said, it's not about cyber, it's about digital, because it goes beyond the online space into our physical lives. Anything and everything that's technology enabled at some point, at some level, is violating your privacy. You know about the case of all the digital assistants admitting that they have been listening to your private conversations and whatnot, right? So you know these things are happening. What are the rights? There is a law which is likely to come in, which is intended to protect children. You have across multiple jurisdictions, laws and case laws that have evolved fairly substantially in terms of protecting the rights of children. But a few $1 million or even several $1 million of fines are not going to help the victims whose rights have been violated. The best way to protect yourself is prevention. And that prevention comes with a very conscious understanding of what you're bringing in and how you're going to use it. And do not substitute convenience for giving up privacy. So the reason why the digital assistants were able to listen to even private conversations and whatnot is because it was on always. Because it's so much more convenient instead of saying a trigger word, right? So convenience is the real enemy of privacy. So don't take convenience as an easy way out. Shortcuts will always result in some problem for the person taking it most. So be cautious. Don't be paranoid. We can't eschew technology. We can't avoid it, but we can definitely use it responsibly.
Thank you very much, Nappinai. And I have to, I think, grudgingly end this dialogue, this panel. There's a lot of, I must use that word now, there's a lot of juice in cybersecurity. There's a lot of interest. And actually, there's a lot of importance because I saw a WhatsApp message a few days back in which children in Australia were in the picture with placards in their hands. They were representing against parents who had no time for them outside of their mobile phones. And I think we have a different generation. The panelists maybe belong to a generation that has a very different type of a responsibility. I think we are going to, how should I say, be that generation that is likely to hand off into the digital avatar of the human beings. And we are likely to learn, stumble, fall in this discovery process. So Nappinai's caution is, I think, very real. Unfortunately, that learning is also going to be difficult, as is any other learning. But the discussion today and the debate today was, to my mind and to my own person, extremely knowledgeable, extremely insightful. And I'd like to thank the organizers again. Very much want to thank Nappinai, Sailaja, and Amit. And I think we should say our goodbyes now so that the rest of the discussion can be conducted by the organizers. Thank you, organizers. I hand this back to you now.
Thank you so much for this very vibrant, informative session on cybersecurity, dear moderator and panelists. We couldn't have got anyone else better to represent the government, legal, and technical community from our country for the youth, and they were really looking forward for this session. And we are very delighted to have you on board. With such a diverse group, it was such an intriguing session. And although it crossed a little bit, we were so immersed in all your discussions. We would really love to have you all at the next session or in the next coming programs also. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you, everyone. Bye for now.
Okay.